What's up, everybody? You're here with the Fly Guy. Okay, so today I'm just going to give you kind of a brief update on what I'm doing with one of my 6 weights here that I'm building. I am building this on a Moonlit Fly Fishing Lunar S-Glass blank. This is a 6 weight and it is an 8-foot 2-inch model. So what I've done is pretty common in the fly rod building world. I have cut off a short section of the butt and then put in a stent. Now I use wooden dowel rods for my stents. You can use different types of materials. Once you've got the fighting butt, the reel seat, and all that epoxy on there, a 1/4 inch or greater dowel rod is not going to break easily, if at all. Depending on how brutally hard you are on tackle. So this is up into the blank. If you can see here, you can see the masking tape bushings I've already put in. That is up into the blank about 2 inches, and that is locked in place. It's not going anywhere. And all I'm going to do today is apply some masking tape to the dowel rod, to the stent, and I am going to put on this EVA fighting butt. This particular blank, I am going unconventional, and I'm going to be doing an EVA fighting butt and grip. The EVA grip that I'm going to use is a full Wells black EVA grip, and I just think this is going to really look nice with the orange blank, and then the other orange coloration with the thread work that I'm going to do on this blank. So I think it's going to look really sharp. The epoxy that I'm going to be using today is, this is actually an epoxy you can get at hardware stores. It's very good. This is DevCon Home 2-ton epoxy. Now, the reason that I buy this is not only because it's super strong, but the price is right, and it has a 30-minute setup time. So I like the fact that I can take 30 minutes before it really starts to tack up and get this rolling. Because if I need to align a reel seat, if I need to make sure things are in place and it starts tacking up too quick, I could actually lose a good bond. So I highly recommend this, so I will put a link in the description to this epoxy down below, so check that out. And I believe they offer it through Amazon Prime, so I'll put a link there for you. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to start by putting on a masking tape bushing, and all I need to do is get it to a fairly snug fit into that inner bore. And this is about 5/8 inner bore. The one thing that I recommend when you are putting in a stent, whether it's a dowel rod, an extra spare piece of maybe a graphite fly rod or fiberglass, whatever you choose to use as a stent, make sure that you sand it down so that the epoxy can bite, and so that the masking tape bushing that you're putting on, when you wrap it tight, it doesn't spin and come off. Okay, we're just checking our fit. That is a little loose, so I'm going to add just a little bit more here to the masking tape bushing. One of the nice things about working with EVA is that if you make the bushing a little too big, the EVA will give slightly, and it'll be able to incorporate that bushing just a little bit easier than cork. So it is a snug fit here, but what I will do is make sure that I put an extra piece of masking tape up here and apply another bushing. It's going to stick out farther than the fighting butt itself, but what that's going to do is that's going to ensure that later on down the line I don't have failure out in the field. I use a lot of epoxy and make sure that there's not only a good bond, but all my items that I'm putting on, reel seat, fighting butt, cork handle are secured and they're not going anywhere for the life of the rod. If I'm going to build a rod, I'm going to make it better than what I can in the store, and I'm going to ensure that I don't have any failures out there. Okay, all you got to do once you get your first bushing on there is to just kind of marry it up and match it with your first one, and you're good to go. You could mark on the masking tape bushing, the second one. You could make a mark right here with a pencil and use an X-Acto knife and cut that down. There is no need to do that, in my opinion, because I'm going to be making more masking tape bushings here on this exposed section to incorporate the reel seat. So I'm just going to be putting more masking tape over it anyway, so just leaving it there is just going to ensure that I get a good soak with the epoxy when the reel seat is installed. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and just mix up our epoxy. It's kind of simple here for us with this DevCon Home. It's already kind of in two separate pieces here, right side by side, so all we got to do is just push this plunger down, mix it up, and get going. It's always good when you're mixing up epoxy to have just a cheap plate, paper plate or plastic plate with some aluminum foil on it. That'll increase your pot life of your epoxy and it'll enable you to get a few more minutes out of it if you're doing an application that requires just a little bit more time in alignment. For this, I'm probably going to do about a quarter-sized drop here. So that should be good. I'd rather have just a little bit more epoxy than what I need than too little. Running out of epoxy and needing to mix some up while the other batch is drying on your component that you're putting on is never a good position to be in. And all I'm doing here is just mixing this up. I usually take, with this 30-minute epoxy, I usually take about, I don't know, maybe a minute. Mix it up thoroughly. If you need to take a minute and 30 seconds, even 2 minutes, depending on how quickly you're mixing it or, what you see in the clarity of the epoxy. I just take my time, get it mixed up thoroughly so I know that I'm going to get a good bond. Yet again, this is another reason to be using that 30-minute epoxy, because if you're using 5-minute epoxy and you spend a minute mixing it up, you're gonna lose some time to put your stuff on. So I'm not trying to downplay 5-minute epoxy. It's great for repairs, but I definitely advocate for this 30-minute epoxy because it can flow and really soak into what you're putting onto your rod. So make sure you mix this up thoroughly. Get it to where it needs to be, and then you're going to get ready and apply this to your masking tape bushings. Alright, so we're just going to slip off that fighting butt, and we're going to take our epoxy. And the nice thing about using a rod turner here, what I always do is I make sure that my plate is underneath what I'm working on, so any drips go right on the aluminum foil and they don't go onto my rod wrapper. But I can use this as a support, and I can use one hand to apply the epoxy and one hand to spin it. Okay, so one of the most important pieces of equipment in your rod building workshop is paper towels. You need to have these on hand. I get these at the Dollar Tree. They have these big, like 300 sheet rolls for $1. cheap but effective, and all you're doing is using it to make sure that you can clean up epoxy and get things looking tidy. If you're worried about the epoxy on this front side of the butt, one thing that I do is, use a little bit when it's wet and it hasn't tacked up yet. I can use rubbing alcohol to kind of clean that up, and it's not going to impact the bond. Denatured alcohol is the preferred substance to be used, but I find that if I use denatured alcohol and then get it close to where I'm trying to bond, sometimes it can impact the quality of that epoxy if you're not careful. So I use rubbing alcohol, and it's kind of a mix in between the two, and that'll help you cut the epoxy and clean it up, but yet not impact that bond that's in the center of the EVA. After you get your epoxy cleaned up, it's really easy. You just take the rod and press down, straight up and down with the butt on the table, your workspace, and just make sure that it's pushed all the way to the bottom of the fighting butt, so that way you get a good bond with your epoxy. After letting it dry for 24 hours, I decided to go ahead and install the reel seat as well. The way that it lines up, the arrows on the reel seat line up with the Moonlit Fly Fishing logo, so it's pretty cool. And basically all I did was almost identical to what I did with the fighting butt. I literally just put some masking tape bushings on the stint that I had already installed and aligned it, made sure that it was aligned with the spine of the blank. By taking accurate measurements, I was able to put part of the reel seat on the stint and part of it on the rod blank. This just kind of equally distributes pressure so that it's not all on the stint with the reel seat and fighting butt. So this is going to increase durability. The top end of the reel seat is going to go into a recessed portion of my EVA full wells grip, and I will be doing full detailed tutorials on how to fully install a stint into a fiberglass fly rod blank, how to install a reel seat, and how to install basically all the components that I put on a fly rod. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, make sure that you hit the button below and make sure you hit that bell so you know when new videos come out. If you like this video, go ahead and hit thumbs up. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care, and we'll catch you next time.